making its way towards the west steps of St. George's Chapel.
She stepped out looking untouchable, dripping in pieces worth more than most people will see in a lifetime, wrapped in luxury that screamed money from every angle. She was about to walk into one of the most watched events in modern history, with 65 million people locked in and watching every move. The streets of Windsor were packed tight, hundreds of
Prince Harry and Meghan have hit back at controversial biographer Tom Bower over his new book, which says Prince Harry was brainwashed by his wife.
thousands lining up, waving flags, cheering like they were witnessing something out of a dream. The whole world labeled it a fairy tale. But here's the part nobody really said out loud back then. Whose fairy tale was it really? Now, fast forward to March 2026, and the vibe has completely shifted. The walls are closing in fast, and the man reportedly holding the blueprint to all of it is Tom Bower, a biographer known for digging deep and tearing apart the polished images of powerful figures. This is someone who has gone after media giants, prime ministers, even billionaires, and now his full focus is locked on the Duchess of Sussex. What he's laying out doesn't sound like a love story at all. It comes off more like a calculated strategy, a carefully managed image built layer by layer. And those layers are starting to crack in a way that's hard to ignore. So stay locked in, because this isn't surface level talk. We're breaking down 10 of the most talked about claims tied to Meghan Markle and that massive £32 million royal wedding. And things get uncomfortable real quick. What the world celebrated like a perfect moment, insiders now describe it as something way more tense, almost like a full-on siege behind closed doors. These aren't just random tabloid whispers either. These claims are tied to palace records, eyewitness accounts, and even statements linked to a sitting archbishop. And by the time we hit truth number 10, it starts to make sense why Meghan is reportedly under serious pressure in Montecito right now, and why people say the situation isn't slowing down anytime soon. Ugly truth number 1, and this is where things get real messy. Some are calling it Operation Royal, and it flips the whole story on its head. Let's rewind, because this is where everything starts to fall apart. During that headline-making Oprah interview, Meghan looked straight into the camera, calm and controlled, and said she didn't know much about the royal family and didn't even Google Harry. Pause right there, because that line raised a lot of eyebrows. According to Tom Bower, pulling from socialites, former colleagues, and people connected to London's elite circles, the timeline being painted looks very different, almost shockingly different. He claims what he calls Operation Royal didn't just appear out of nowhere in 2016 or even 2015. The suggestion is that it may trace back to 2013, the same year her marriage to film producer Trevor Engelson reportedly came to an end, which is where many believe the entire trajectory quietly shifted. And instead of stepping back to quietly process and rebuild, the claim here is way more strategic. Bower alleges she shifted into a focused, calculated push to break into Britain's highest social circles. Think about that for a second, because it flips the entire narrative. While telling Oprah she didn't even Google the man she would later marry, these sources are saying something completely different was happening behind the scenes. According to those accounts, she had already spent years studying key details about Prince Harry, how he thought, what drove him, what weighed on him emotionally. The claim suggests she understood he was deeply affected by the loss of his mother, that he carried guilt, frustration, and a strong desire to break away from royal pressure. She knew about his connection to Africa, his passion for charity work, and the causes that mattered most to him. Piece by piece, it's described like a full emotional profile had been mapped out before they ever sat face to face. So when that first meeting finally happened, set up through a mutual contact at London's exclusive Soho house, it wasn't just casual energy, at least according to this version of events. Bower's argument paints it differently. Not an actress hoping sparks would fly, but someone walking in already prepared, already aware, already playing the part that would connect fast. The image presented is a perfect match to everything Harry had been searching for at that time. And if that's true, then the big question hits even harder. Does that really line up with someone who didn't Google him? Social media archives before 2016 tell a story that doesn't match the innocent, wide-eyed outsider image at all. Old photos, posts, connections, it's all there, forming a digital trail that points to a strong interest in British high society long before the fairy tale narrative took over. And when you line that up with the public story, the contrast feels hard to ignore. Bauer even goes as far as calling it the most defining role of her entire acting career. And this wasn't a TV set, this was real life with real power attached to it. Because unlike her time on Suits, this role came with stakes that reached into the hundreds of millions of pounds and global influence that most people never touch. That's where things start to feel less like coincidence and more like careful positioning, at least according to these claims. Now let's get into ugly truth number 2, because this detail flew under the radar for a lot of people, but insiders didn't miss it. We're talking about the wedding day, May 19, 2018, and one very specific choice that raised serious eyebrows. A car, but not just any car, the Rolls-Royce Phantom 4. Here's why that matters. Only 18 of these were ever made, making it one of the rarest vehicles in the entire royal muse. But the real shock isn't just the rarity, it's the history tied to it. This exact model was known as the preferred car of Wallis Simpson, and if that name rings bells, it's because her relationship with King Edward VIII triggered one of the biggest royal crises ever, leading to his abdication in 1936 and shaking the monarchy to its core. She remains one of the most controversial American figures ever linked to the royal family, a name that still carries weight, tension, and serious historical baggage. So when this car showed up on that wedding day, some insiders reportedly saw it as more than just a style choice. It looked like a message, loud and clear. According to Bauer, the palace didn't just go along with this quietly either. Sources claim staff offered several alternative vehicles, options that were traditional, meaningful, and fully aligned with royal history and protocol. But despite those suggestions, this was the car that made the final cut, and that decision did not go unnoticed behind palace walls. Meghan reportedly turned down every single alternative and stood firm on the Phantom 4. Some people might brush that off as coincidence, but Bauer and those palace sources don't see it that way at all. They interpret it as something intentional, a calculated signal aimed straight at Queen Elizabeth II and everything the institution represents. The message, as they frame it, felt bold and impossible to ignore, like saying, "I'm not here to blend in, and I won't be controlled." Think about the level of confidence that would take, making that kind of statement on your own wedding day inside one of the most traditional institutions in the world. Tom Bauer doesn't label it as simple rebellion either. He frames it as something sharper, more deliberate. And according to his view, that one decision cast a long shadow that stretched far beyond the ceremony itself. Now, ugly truth number 3 takes things inside St. George's Chapel, and this is where the reaction reportedly turned from quiet concern to outright shock. Because if the car choice was subtle, what happened next was anything but. St. George's Chapel isn't just any venue, it's a 500-year-old sacred space, packed with royal history, where monarchs have been laid to rest and major ceremonies have taken place for generations. By any standard, it's one of the most respected and symbolic locations in the entire country. But according to reports cited by royal journalist Robert Jobson and included in Bauer's research, Meghan allegedly took issue with what she described as a musty smell inside the chapel, and her response? She reportedly asked that staff use air fresheners throughout the space before guests arrived, something that for many insiders crossed a line that simply isn't crossed in a place like that. Palace staff, people who had served the royal household for years, who understood the weight and meaning of the spaces they were responsible for, were reportedly asked to spray commercial air freshener inside a consecrated, centuries-old monument. And their response? They refused. Of course they refused. What followed, according to Bauer's sources, wasn't a calm discussion or a polite back and forth. It was described as a full-on explosion of temper that left staff shaken. Bauer's take on this is sharp and direct. He argues this wasn't about perfectionism or wedding nerves at all. In his words, it reflected something far more controlling in tone. He claims Meghan approached the chapel less like a sacred historical site and more like a film set, something to adjust, clean up, and reshape to fit a certain vision. And even though this moment might seem small on the surface, insiders say it triggered something much bigger behind the scenes. Because this is where the shift really began to show. Staff who had already been dealing with constant pressure, early morning emails, repeated corrections, and what some described as a dismissive tone started quietly stepping away from their roles. One by one, aides began to leave, and the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. The exodus, so-called, didn't happen after the wedding. It had already started before the cake was even cut, which says a lot about the internal atmosphere at the time. Now, ugly truth number 4 takes us to one of the most talked about moments of the entire ceremony, the walk down the aisle. To the public, it was framed as powerful and symbolic, a strong, independent woman walking forward on her own terms. That image spread fast and was celebrated everywhere, but Bauer's investigation digs into what was happening behind that moment, and the story he presents is a lot more layered. According to his findings, Meghan choosing to walk the first half of the aisle alone wasn't spontaneous, it was planned and intentional from the start, and the context around that choice adds a whole different angle. This came after her father, Thomas Markle, did not